I hope that during your environment that you may have some classified data, right? And typically classified data could be in the form of, a couple of keywords, could be secret, could be public, could be confidential, could be, a list of keywords that have been defined, right? So it could be something like sensitive as well. And the same is true when we classify incidents or events in incident response. And in this video, we're going to cover the 4 types of alerts and type of keywords that we should be familiar with when we're dealing with incident response and classifying events. So typically, the first thing that we want to do is when an alert happens, and if I've got a host here, I've connected up a host to our network infrastructure, and that host gives us an alert and says something is wrong. I need you to, investigate. Well, the first thing that we need to do is, did this event really occur, right? And from that point on, we need to typically classify the events that kind of happen in our environment. And there's 4 types. The very first one is our true positive. And true positive is all about saying that that event and that activity that happened was true. It actually occurred. There was an incident, and that alert or that log actually did go away and happen. So it was positive in that sense, meaning the event actually occurred and it was in fact true. So hence the true positive nature. The other one here that I want to sort of mention as well is our true negative. And our true negative are kind of a little bit the opposite of our true positive. And this just basically says, well, it was true that nothing happened. And that's all it is, right? It's something that didn't happen, it was not reported, and therefore it didn't occur. So the true component for both of these says, well, it kind of counters each other, right? So if we look at the first part where it says true, did it really happen or did it not happen? And the second part is it positive? So was it alerted or triggered? And the second part could be a negative, so meaning that it was not triggered. So in this case, it was true that it was not triggered. And this part was, yes, it was true and it was a positive event. So they're the 2 types of classifications. Now, as we continue on, we also have something called a false positive. And let me tell you, false positives are a nightmare. And there's a couple of things that we can do with false positives. So the first thing that we can do is we can silence them, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. And what we can do with a silence, there we go. And what typically happens with false positives, this is something that was alerted, but it was false. So we don't know what reason it was for it to happen. Maybe a system may have inaccurately triggered an alert of some sort. So it wasn't necessarily a problem, but the system saw it as maybe a problem. So this kind of happens, I guess, for a couple of reasons. One, maybe there was an inaccurate trigger, right? Or maybe some sort of system issue that happened and it sort of picked up an alert and it said, well, this is wrong. And it has no real impact to the environment. And typically this kind of allows us for a couple of things to happen, right? We've got to go away and waste time to either investigate, maybe we have to log onto that host, investigate why that triggered an alert when it shouldn't have. So there was kind of that false positive, right? Nothing happened, but then the system may have alerted us to say, well, something did occur. And then it wastes resources, right? We've got to go away and waste our time again with investigating, and then erase obviously the resources from our time going away to investigate that issue. So I can give you a bit of an example of this as well. So think about SMB that runs in the environment. And typically SMB is a Windows environment that needs to enable the shares within the directory. So for those of you that are familiar with things like the F drive and the S drive, and we have certain business units using each of those, and then you go into those drives and there's a boatload of information and we've got to go into those and people access those resources. So it's a file sharing capability within our Windows environment. So typically what we will need to do is the main thing to sort of prevent false positives, well, we've got to go away and tune these things, right? And we've got to know how our infrastructure looks. We have to know what services we're using, what products we have, and we've got to go away during setup and make sure that everything is done correctly, during that setup process. So local subnet information, maybe web servers, email servers, other servers that we may have to communicate with. And it's seeing these things that aren't a problem. So again, we can go away and then silence them if we need to. And while I'm talking about this subject of SMB here, SMB is a prime example of that. So SMB requires to run, right? It has to run in the environment for the workstations to communicate and share the files and be accessed across those shares. So typically SMB running on the platform may not be a problem, But then the system, if the system then triggers that or flags it as a problem, then obviously there may be a few security concerns or challenges with SMB. However, if SMB is available over the internet, for example, that could be a critical issue. So if it's running internally in a highly segregated and separate network and stuff like that, it may not be as big risk as opposed to it being maybe exposed over the internet or exposed over a certain port across the internet. So that could be an indication of a false positive. So again, in our environment, if we know the nature of the environment and SMB is running and we've got proper segmentation and stuff like that and private VLANs and VLANs are all nicely organized, it may not be a big risk, right? So we can go away and we can then silence that SMB is running, and then that's not a big issue on our end because we understand the environment's nature, we understand how things are communicating, we understand how products and services. So then we can go away and obviously categorize this in a form of risk. And we can say, well, is this a significant risk or not? No. And that's great. And then we can categorize based on, our vulnerability management if we're doing things like that. So we can go ahead then and sort of silence. I'm just going to silence that piece if we know that that's not a false positive or another issue within a certain protocol or a certain system. So silencing can work in your favor there. As we continue on, so false positives, and the last one here is our false negatives. And our false negative is exactly what it kind of means, right? It was a false and negative response, right? So the negative means it wasn't reported, the system finds the information, but didn't see a problem. So there is a problem and it never was reported, which can sometimes mean this is a problem in itself. So if it doesn't see a problem, it doesn't report it, but in fact, it may be of an issue, but then that's a problem in itself. So we've got to go away and again, tune these things so we understand what our environment is, what it looks like. So if there are security events, but the systems don't see, didn't send an alert or didn't update us, and this can go on unrecognized, right? So this can sometimes cause immediate problems in the environment. So someone can be on the inside or doing some networks, like if we've got a network environment in here, and there is a man in the middle going on, or someone that's doing some sort of snooping in the environment or eavesdropping, this is typically where the problem can start to lie, because if there's negatives and no one's picking this up, or there's been no alert or no notification, and these activities are happening in the environment, well then, and the false negative is coming through, well then that's problematic for us, right? So we want to go away, we want to tune the systems so we understand what's normal. So we get a baseline, we understand the normality. You can write normal baseline because we should know what our environment should look like. And then as we go through that, we understand completely and accurately what our systems look like and the environment, and everything that falls outside of normal is not normal, right? So then we can have that baseline and understand how that operates. So these are the 4 forms of event classification: our true positives, our true negatives, false positives, and false negatives. I hope you've enjoyed this video. And as always, we'll see you in the next video.